The kitchen clock showed 8:30 when Lisa finally closed her thick biology textbook. With a loud thud, she rubbed her tired eyes and looked across the small dining table where her husband David was reading the evening news on his tablet. The warm glow from the overhead light made their cozy apartment feel peaceful. But Lisa's mind was anything but calm. For the third night in a row, she had been staring at the same chapter. About human biology, the pages were filled with complicated diagrams that looked more like engineering blueprints than anything related to the human body. Terms like follicular phase and luteal phase swirled around in her head like alphabet soup. Nothing made sense. Lisa had made a big decision 6 months ago. After working at a small bookstore for nearly 8 years, she decided to go back to school to become a nurse. It was something she had always dreamed about, but life had gotten in the way. Marriage, bills, and daily responsibilities had pushed her dreams to the back burner. But now, at 28, she was finally taking the leap. The problem was, being away from school for so long had made everything feel foreign. Her younger classmates seemed to breeze through concepts that left her feeling confused and behind. The biology course was proving to be her biggest challenge. While she could handle the basic anatomy lessons, the reproductive system chapter had her completely stumped. David noticed her frustrated sigh and looked up from his tablet. He had been a high school science teacher for 7 years and was used to seeing that exact expression on his students' faces. The look of someone who wanted to understand, but felt lost in a sea of information. "Rough night with the books again?" he asked, setting his tablet aside and giving her his full attention. Lisa nodded and pushed the heavy textbook toward him. "I feel so stupid, David. I've read this same section 5 times, and I still don't get it. The test is next week, and I'm going to fail if I don't figure this out." David reached over and squeezed her hand gently. He had watched her struggle with confidence ever since she started school. Lisa was one of the smartest people he knew, but years away from academic life had shaken her belief in herself. He hated seeing her doubt her abilities. "You're not stupid," he said firmly. "Sometimes textbooks just explain things in the most complicated way possible. What exactly is giving you trouble?" Lisa flipped open the book to a page covered with charts and medical terminology. "All of this," she said, waving her hand over the pages. "The whole reproductive system chapter. I understand the basic parts, but when they start talking about cycles and hormones and timing, I get lost. It's like they're speaking a different language." David pulled his chair closer to hers and looked at the open textbook. He had taught health education classes before and was familiar with the topic, but he could see why the textbook would be confusing. The authors had managed to take something that was fundamentally natural and make it sound like rocket science. "Okay, let's try a different approach," he said, pushing the textbook to the side. "Forget about all these fancy terms for a minute. Let me explain it in a way that actually makes sense." Lisa felt a wave of relief wash over her. David had a gift for making complicated things simple. His students loved him because he never made them feel dumb for not understanding something right away. He had this way of breaking down complex ideas into manageable pieces that anyone could follow. "Ray, Lee, you don't mind helping me?" she asked. "I know you've had a long day at school." "Are you kidding me? Of course I'll help you," David said with a smile. "We're a team, remember. Besides, this should be pretty straightforward. We'll have you understanding this stuff in no time." David was confident this would be a quick review session. He figured they could cover the basics in 20 minutes, maybe 30 at most. He had explained reproductive biology to his health classes dozens of times. How hard could it be to give his wife a simple overview? Lisa grabbed a notebook and pen. Feeling hopeful for the first time all week, she trusted David completely. If anyone could help her make sense of this confusing chapter, it was him. She had no idea that what started as a simple request for homework help was about to become something much more significant. "Where should we start?" she asked, her pen poised over a blank page. David looked at the cluttered textbook pages and made a decision. "Let's start from scratch," he said. "I'm going to explain this like you're learning it for the very first time, without all the medical jargon that's making it sound so complicated." As David began to speak, Lisa found herself relaxing for the first time in days. His voice was calm and patient, nothing like the rushed professors in her lecture halls. He started with simple concepts, building one idea on top of another in a way that made perfect sense. Neither of them realized that this innocent study session was about to take them on a journey they never expected. What began as a wife asking her husband for help with homework was about to become a conversation that would change how they understood not just biology, but each other. David started by drawing simple circles on Lisa's notebook paper. Think of this as a monthly cycle, he said, his pen moving smoothly across the page. Everything happens in a pattern, like seasons in a year: spring, summer, fall, winter, and then it starts over again. Lisa watched as he drew and explained, finally beginning to understand concepts that had seemed impossible just minutes before. The way David broke everything down made so much more sense than her textbook's confusing charts and medical language. So it's basically like the body getting ready for something that might happen? She asked, scribbling notes as fast as she could. Exactly, David said, pleased to see the understanding dawn in her eyes. The body is always preparing, just in case. It's actually pretty amazing when you think about it. What David thought would be a quick 20-minute explanation was already stretching into an hour, but neither of them noticed. Lisa's questions kept coming, and each answer seemed to spark 3 more questions. She wasn't just asking about the basic biology anymore. She wanted to know how things really worked in everyday life. But what about when people are trying to have kids? Lisa asked, looking up from her notes. How do they know the right timing? My textbook mentions something about fertile windows, but I don't really understand what that means. David found himself explaining concepts he had never discussed in his high school classes. These were the real-world applications that textbooks often skipped over or mentioned only briefly. As a teacher, he usually stuck to the basic scientific facts. But Lisa's questions were pushing him into territory he rarely explored. Well, he said, reaching for his laptop, let me show you some better diagrams. Your textbook is really outdated. As David pulled up more detailed resources online, Lisa moved her chair closer to see the screen better. The information was fascinating in a way she had never expected. This wasn't just about passing a test anymore. She was learning things that could actually matter in her life. I had no idea there was so much to know, Lisa said, genuinely amazed. No wonder I was confused. My textbook only gives you tiny pieces of the whole picture. David nodded, scrolling through different educational websites. That's the problem with a lot of textbooks. They give you the facts, but not the context. It's like trying to understand a movie by only watching random 5-minute clips. The dining room table was now covered with Lisa's notebook pages, printouts from David's laptop, and sticky notes with important points. What had started as a simple homework session was turning into a comprehensive education. Can I ask you something personal? Lisa said, her voice quieter than before. David looked up from the laptop screen. Of course. What's on your mind? Well, we've been married for 3 years, and I'm realizing I don't really understand my own body as well as I thought I did. Like, I know the basics, but some of this stuff, I never learned it properly. David closed the laptop and gave her his full attention. This was a side of Lisa he rarely saw. She was usually confident and sure of herself, but right now she seemed vulnerable and a little embarrassed. There's nothing wrong with not knowing everything, he said gently. Most people don't get a proper education about this stuff. Schools barely touch on it, and families often don't talk about it either. Lisa nodded, feeling relieved that David wasn't making her feel foolish for her lack of knowledge. I keep thinking about my future patients too. If I'm going to be a nurse, I should really understand these things properly. Not just enough to pass a test. That's a great point, David said. Your patients are going to have questions, and they'll need someone who can explain things clearly and compassionately. As they continued talking, David found himself sharing knowledge he had gained not just from textbooks, but from years of answering awkward questions from teenagers, attending health education seminars, and reading research studies. Lisa was an eager student, taking notes and asking follow-up questions that showed she was really thinking about everything. He explained. You know what's funny? Lisa said, looking at all the papers spread across their table. I was so worried about this chapter, but now I'm actually enjoying learning about it. When you explain it right, it's really interesting. David smiled, feeling proud of his wife's curiosity and determination. You're a natural learner, Lisa. You just needed someone to present the information in a way that made sense to you. The clock on the kitchen wall now showed 10:30, but neither of them was ready to stop. Lisa had moved beyond her original textbook chapter and was asking questions about topics that wouldn't be covered until later in her course. David was enjoying the challenge of explaining complex concepts in simple terms. I have another question, Lisa said, then paused. Actually, it's kind of personal again. Go ahead, David encouraged her. We're way past worrying about personal questions at this point. Lisa laughed softly. I guess you're right. We've been talking about pretty personal stuff for the last hour and a half. As Lisa formulated her next question, both of them realized that their simple study session had evolved into something much deeper. They weren't just covering academic material anymore. They were having conversations about life, health, and experiences that they had somehow never explored together before. David glanced at his watch and was shocked to see how much time had passed. This was supposed to be a quick review, but Lisa's genuine curiosity and thoughtful questions had drawn him into the most engaging teaching session he had experienced in years. He was learning just as much as he was sharing, seeing familiar topics through completely new eyes. Neither of them was ready to stop, even though they both had early mornings ahead of them. The conversation had taken on a life of its own, and they were both discovering just how much they still had to learn about subjects they thought they already understood. Lisa took a deep breath and looked down at her hands. I've been wondering about something for a while now, but I never knew how to bring it up. David could sense the shift in her tone. This wasn't just another academic question. He set aside the papers they had been reviewing and turned to face her completely. What's been on your mind? Well, Lisa began slowly. Learning all this stuff tonight has made me realize how little I actually know about my own health. Like, I go to my doctor once a year for a checkup, but I never really ask questions. I just assume everything is normal, because no one tells me otherwise. David nodded encouragingly. He could see that Lisa was working up the courage to share something important. The thing is, she continued, I sometimes worry that I'm not normal. I mean, everyone's different, right? But how do you know if what you're experiencing is actually normal or if there's something you should be concerned about? This wasn't the kind of question David usually fielded in his classroom, but he could hear the genuine concern in Lisa's voice. That's actually a really important question, he said carefully. A lot of people wonder about the same things but never ask. Anyone? Lisa felt encouraged by his response. I guess I've always been too embarrassed to talk to my doctor about certain things. And my mom, well, she's not really the type of person you can have these conversations with. David understood. Lisa's mother was a sweet woman, but she came from a generation that didn't discuss personal health topics openly. Lisa had grown up in a household where such subjects were simply not talked about. You know, David said thoughtfully, one of the things I've learned from teaching health classes is that most people have the same questions and concerns. What seems unusual to you is probably completely normal. Really? Lisa asked, looking relieved. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only person who doesn't have everything figured out. David laughed gently. Trust me, nobody has everything figured out. I've been teaching this stuff for years, and I'm still learning new things all the time. As they continued talking, Lisa found herself sharing concerns she had carried for years but never voiced. She talked about times when she had worried whether her experiences were typical, moments when she had wished she had someone knowledgeable to ask for advice. I think that's part of why I want to be a nurse, she said. I want to be the kind of person patients feel comfortable talking to about anything. Someone who won't make them feel embarrassed or stupid for asking questions. David felt a surge of pride as he listened to his wife. You're going to be an amazing nurse, he said. Sincerely, the fact that you understand what it feels like to have unanswered questions will make you so much better at helping other people. The conversation was taking them into territory they had never explored together. Even though they had been married for 3 years, they were discussing aspects of health and wellness that somehow had never come up in their daily conversations. Can I tell you something else? Lisa asked, her voice even quieter now. Of course, David replied, noticing how the atmosphere in the room had become more intimate and serious. Sometimes I wonder if we communicate as well as we should about personal things, Lisa said, choosing her words carefully. Like, we talk about work and bills and what to have for dinner, but we don't really talk about deeper stuff very often, David considered her words. She was right. They had fallen into comfortable routines over the years, but those routines didn't always include the kind of meaningful conversations they were having right now. You're absolutely right, he admitted. We're good at handling the day-to-day stuff, but we don't always make time for the bigger conversations. Lisa nodded. I guess I never realized how much I didn't know, not just about biology, but about us, about how we could be better at talking to each other about important things. The textbook that had started their evening lay forgotten on the far end of the table. What had begun as studying for a test had become a conversation about communication, understanding, and the gaps in knowledge that everyone carries but rarely discusses. I'm learning things about you tonight that I never knew before, David said softly. After 3 years of marriage, that's kind of amazing, Lisa smiled. I'm learning things about myself too. Having someone to talk to openly about these topics makes such a difference. I feel like I understand myself better already. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing how much their relationship had deepened in just a few hours. The simple request for homework help had opened doors they hadn't even realized were closed. You know what's interesting? Lisa said eventually. I came to you tonight feeling frustrated and confused about my schoolwork, but now I feel like we've had one of the most important conversations of our marriage. David reached over and took her hand. Maybe that's what good relationships are supposed to do. Help each other learn and grow, even when you're not expecting it. The clock now showed nearly midnight, but neither of them felt tired. They felt energized by the connection they had discovered, excited by the realization that they could share thoughts and concerns they had both been carrying alone. I don't want this conversation to end, Lisa said. But I also don't want to forget everything we've talked about tonight. We won't forget, David assured her. This feels like the beginning of something, not the end, as they looked at each other across their paper-covered table. Both Lisa and David knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. They had started the evening as husband and wife, but they were ending it as partners in a deeper, more meaningful way than they had ever experienced before. The kitchen clock chimed midnight, its gentle sound breaking through the quiet intensity that had settled over their dining room. Lisa looked up at the clock in surprise, then back at David with wide eyes. Has it really been almost 4 hours? She asked, barely believing how quickly the time had passed. David glanced around at their table, which now looked like a small library had exploded on it. Papers covered every inch of the surface. Lisa's notebook was filled with pages of notes, and his laptop was still open to various educational websites. What had started as a simple request to help with one chapter had somehow expanded into the most comprehensive learning session either of them had ever experienced. I can't believe we've been talking this whole time, David said, shaking his head in amazement. It feels like we just started. Lisa leaned back in her chair and looked at everything they had covered. Her original biology textbook sat at the edge of the table, barely touched after those first few minutes. They had moved so far beyond what she needed for her test that she had almost forgotten about the exam entirely. David, she said slowly, I need to tell you something. When I asked for your help tonight, I was just trying to pass a test. I was frustrated and scared that I was going to fail. David nodded, remembering how upset she had looked when she first closed that textbook with such force. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being about studying. Lisa continued, This became about so much more than I ever expected. She was right, and David knew it. He had started the evening confident that he would quickly explain some basic concepts and send her off to bed feeling prepared for her exam. Instead, he found himself having conversations that challenged everything he thought he knew about teaching, learning, and even about his own marriage. I keep thinking about all the times over the years when I had questions but didn't know who to ask. Lisa said, her voice filled with emotion, tonight. I finally had someone who could help me understand things that have confused me for so long. David felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. As a teacher, he was used to helping students understand difficult concepts, but this was different. Tonight, he wasn't just teaching biology or health education. He was helping the person he loved most in the world feel more confident and knowledgeable about life itself. You know what I realized tonight? David said, choosing his words carefully. I've been teaching these topics to teenagers for 7 years, but I've never really thought about how this information applies to real adult relationships. In real-life situations, Lisa tilted her head, curious about where he was going with this thought. In my classroom, I stick to the textbook facts because that's what's safe and appropriate, David explained. But tonight, talking with you, I've been thinking about all the questions my students probably have that they're too embarrassed to ask, questions about real life, about relationships, about being an adult. That's exactly what I was thinking, Lisa said excitedly. When I become a nurse, my patients are going to have the same kinds of questions I had tonight. They're going to need someone who understands that learning about health isn't just about memorizing facts from a book. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what had happened between them. This wasn't just about biology or nursing school or teaching. This was about understanding themselves and each other in a completely new way. I feel like we're different people than we were 4 hours ago, Lisa said softly. David reached across the table and took her hand. We're still the same people. We just know each other better now. Is that what this was? Lisa asked, getting to know each other better. David thought about her question. They had been together for 5 years, married for 3. He thought he knew everything about Lisa that mattered. But tonight had revealed layers of her personality, her concerns, her dreams, and her fears that he had never seen before. I think, David said slowly, tonight was about discovering that even when you love someone and live with them every day, there's always more to learn about them. Lisa squeezed his hand. And about yourself too. I learned things about myself tonight that I never would have discovered on my own. The house was quiet around them. Their neighbors had long since gone to bed, and the only sounds were the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing by on their street. But inside their small dining room, Lisa and David felt wide awake and energized. I don't want to go to bed yet, Lisa admitted. I feel like if we stop talking now, we might lose some of this. David understood exactly what she meant. They had found something precious tonight, a way of communicating and connecting that felt new and important. The idea of ending the conversation and returning to their normal routines felt almost impossible. We won't lose it, David said with confidence. This isn't something that just happens once and then disappears. We've learned how to talk to each other in a new way. Lisa looked around at all their papers and notes, evidence of the journey they had taken together. My biology test is in 3 days, she said with a laugh. I think I'm going to do just fine. Better than fine, David agreed. You're going to understand that material better than anyone else in your class. But they both knew that passing the test was no longer the most important outcome of their evening together. They had discovered something much more valuable than academic success. They had found a deeper connection with each other and a new appreciation for the power of honest, open conversation. As they finally began to gather up their papers and clothes the laptop, both Lisa and David knew that this night would become a treasured memory. It would be the night they learned that sometimes the best discoveries happen when you're not even looking for them. 3 weeks had passed since that unforgettable night at their dining room table, and Lisa was walking out of her biology classroom with a huge smile on her face. She had just gotten her test results back, and the grade was even better than she had hoped for. But more importantly, she had felt confident answering every single question. As she made her way across campus to meet David for lunch, Lisa thought about how much had changed since that evening when she had been so frustrated with her textbook. The information that had once seemed impossible to understand now felt like second nature to her. During the exam, she hadn't just memorized facts and regurgitated them onto the paper. She had truly understood the concepts, and that understanding had come through in her answers. Her professor had even written a note at the top of her test paper: "Excellent work. Your explanation showed real comprehension of the material." But the academic success was just the beginning of how that night had changed things for both of them. David was already sitting at their usual table in the small cafe near campus when Lisa arrived, practically bouncing with excitement. "I take if the test went well?" he asked, grinning at her obvious joy. "Better than well," Lisa said, sliding into the seat across from him and pulling her test paper out of her backpack. "Look at this grade, and look what Professor Johnson wrote." David read the note and felt immensely proud of his wife. "This is fantastic, Lisa. But I'm not surprised at all. You understood that material better than most people ever will." "That's not even the best part," Lisa said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "After class today, 3 different classmates came up to me asking if I could help them study for the next exam. Apparently, word got around about how well I did." David raised his eyebrows, impressed. "Are you going to help them?" "Of course I am," Lisa said without hesitation. "And I think I know exactly how to explain things to them in a way that makes sense." Over the past 3 weeks, Lisa had discovered that she had a natural gift for breaking down complex information and explaining it clearly to others. Just like David had done for her that night, she found herself able to take confusing textbook language and translate it into terms that anyone could understand. "You're becoming quite the teacher yourself," David observed. Lisa laughed. "I learn from the best. But you know what's funny? Helping other people understand this stuff is making me understand it even better myself." This was something David knew well from his years in the classroom. Teaching others was often the best way to deepen your own knowledge of a subject. He was thrilled to see Lisa discovering this for herself. "Speaking of teaching," David said, "I've been making some changes in my own classes based on our conversation that night." Lisa looked intrigued. "What kind of changes?" "Well," David began, "I realized that I had been teaching the same way for years, sticking strictly to the textbook and avoiding any questions that went beyond the basic curriculum. But after talking with you, I understood that my students probably have a lot of real-world questions that I never address." David had started incorporating more practical applications into his lessons, helping his students understand how the scientific concepts they were learning connected to their actual lives. He was still careful to keep everything appropriate for his classroom setting, but he had found ways to make the material more relevant and engaging. "The difference in my students has been amazing," David continued. "They're asking better questions, participating more in discussions, and their test scores have improved across the board." Lisa felt a warm sense of pride knowing that their conversation had influenced David's teaching in such a positive way. "It sounds like that night helped both of us become better at what we do." But the changes in their professional lives were just part of the story. The bigger transformation had happened in their relationship with each other. Over the past 3 weeks, Lisa and David had continued to have the kind of deep, meaningful conversations that had started that night. They had established a new pattern of really talking to each other about important things, not just the surface-level daily topics they used to stick to. "I was thinking about something yesterday," Lisa said, taking a sip of her coffee. "Before that night, we were good roommates who happened to be married. We got along great, we managed our household well, and we cared about each other. But we weren't really sharing our inner thoughts and feelings very much." David nodded thoughtfully. "We were comfortable, but maybe we were almost too comfortable. We had stopped being curious about each other." "Exactly," Lisa agreed. "Now I feel like we're partners in a much deeper way. We're still the same people who love each other, but we're also friends who actually talk about meaningful things. Their friends had started to notice the change in their relationship too. At a dinner party the previous weekend, another couple had commented on how engaged Lisa and David seemed with each other, how they really listened when the other person spoke. It's like you two are newly dating, even though you've been married for years, their friend had said. The comment had made both Lisa and David smile, because in some ways, it was true. They were getting to know each other all over again, discovering new depths in their relationship that they hadn't known existed. I keep thinking about how that whole night started, Lisa said, shaking her head in amazement. I was so frustrated. With one stupid chapter in a textbook, I never could have imagined that asking for help with homework would lead to all of this. David reached across the table and took her hand, just like he had done that night 3 weeks ago. Maybe that's the lesson, he said. Sometimes the most important moments in life start with something completely ordinary. Lisa looked down at their joined hands and smiled. You know what I realized? I don't think I was really asking for help with biology that night. I think I was asking for help with understanding myself and my life better. I just didn't know. That's what I needed, and I thought I was just going to help my wife pass a test, David said with a laugh. Instead, I ended up learning more about teaching, about relationships, and about myself than I had in years. As they finished their lunch and prepared to go back to their respective afternoon activities, both Lisa and David felt grateful for that night, when a simple study session had turned into something so much more meaningful. They had learned that sometimes the best education doesn't come from textbooks or classrooms. Sometimes it comes from being open with the people you love, asking honest questions, and being willing to explore new ways of understanding the world and each other. Lisa packed her test paper back into her backpack, but she knew that the real treasure from that night wasn't the good grade she had earned. It was the stronger, deeper, more connected relationship she and David had discovered together.